Right, so good morning. We are going to convene our morning meeting and welcome Legislative Counsel Damian Leonard with us to look at the sections of S-100 that he drafted.
Great. Morning, everybody. So I'm going to start you with section 26 as it passed or was recommended by House General last night. So this is in our Building and Fire Safety chapter in Title 20. What it does is it clarifies how accessory dwelling units are treated for purposes of the state building and life safety codes. So under the current law, you'll see there's a lot of little snippets of current law that I've included before we get to the changed language. So starting on page 38, the definition of public building, if you look down at A1D, includes a building in which people rent accommodations, whether overnight or for a longer term. And then in subsection B, what you'll see is the term public building does not include an owner-occupied single-family residence unless it's used for one of the purposes described in subsection A. And those purposes include running a business, renting out the accommodation. So if your single-family home is also a boarding house where you rent the rooms out on a rotating basis, it would be covered by the public building standards, meaning that you might have to have certain fire protection or means of egress, or other things depending on the requirements. And I'm not an expert on the specifics of the building code, but this puts you into the realm of the building code where you then have to look at what are the characteristics of my building and what requirements do I have based on those characteristics. And then previously it said an owner-occupied or a single-family residence with an accessory dwelling unit was exempt from the building code. However, the way this had been interpreted was it was exempt unless it was, if you look back to page 38, a building in which people rented accommodations, whether overnight or for a longer term. So the Division of Fire Safety had interpreted this to apply the Building and Fire Safety Code if, for example, that accessory dwelling unit was used as a short-term rental on Airbnb, or if it was being rented out to someone besides a family member. So if it was a rented apartment that was on the public market. So what they've provided, what the language that the Senate settled on and the House General kept would clarify that it's an owner-occupied single-family residence with an accessory dwelling unit is exempt unless it's rented overnight or for a longer term, as described in the first part, setting out the definition of public building. So it's essentially clarifying how the law has been applied by the Division of Fire Safety and just codifying that. So,
Representative Baumgart.
Don't spend a lot of time on this, but does that mean the whole house becomes a public building or just the ADU?
So I think it depends on which parts are rented overnight or for a longer term. My understanding is if you're renting rooms in the house as well, it's also subject, but if you're just renting the ADU, it's the ADU they're looking at. But you may wish to just double check with Division of Fire Safety. That's my understanding, but.
All right, thanks. Any other questions? Representative Stebbins.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm sorry if I should know this already, but if you have an ADU and you only rent it for like a week, a year, I'm assuming there's some sort of trigger in terms of how frequent you do it.
So meaning renting it out as
something.
I
additional income, like if it's owner occupied, you live there and you leave for the summer and you rent it out for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure what the trigger is. If, for example, for example, a lot of you will be familiar with folks who have a single family house and then they leave for January to May. Well, they're down in Florida or Arizona and they rent it out to legislators. I don't know what the trigger is from Division of Fire Safety's standpoint, where they cut that off, whether it's once you do it for a day, you're within the public building, or whether there's a sort of de minimis exception. I can certainly look into that for you and try to get you an answer. Or that would be something also, if you're hearing from Division of Fire Safety, you could ask Mike DeRocher to explain how they do that. Because I know they are mentioned at least in the RBE's study in sections 24 and 25. So I don't know if you're planning to hear from them.
Yeah. All right.
Section 27 is really straightforward. This would create one new full-time litigator position at the Human Rights Commission and appropriate $150,000 in fiscal year 24 for personal services related to that position. So that's salary and benefits and other related expenses for that position. And the background on this is that the Human Rights Commission is understaffed, and this would allow them to, or allow the executive director more time to focus on being the director rather than litigating complaints that don't settle. So if, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Human Rights Commission, typically when they do an investigation, they try to reach a settlement. But when they can't do that, they go to court. So the difficulty being that with their limited staff of investigators and the executive director, they're busy investigating, trying to reach settlements with the parties, and then also having to take cases to court, which would take the executive director or whichever other one of their attorneys is on that case, essentially make it so that they're unable to do their other work while that case is in court, because that's a full-time commitment when you're actually litigating in court and going to trial. So they've been struggling with limited staff, and this would just provide additional resources for them.
So I'm watching Brian. Brian, this section was deleted in the one that we had printed,
Yes.
but it is in the online one. If you
Okay, because I was gonna say,
I know,
it's something missing.
yeah, something missing. So they put in the sections that were moved by the Senate.
But we don't have a hard copy of this yet, do we?
No, we don't. Yeah.
So yes, Senate Appropriations took this out because it had money and a position in it. House General added it back in. I'm not sure where this will end up, given the usual question of whether you put all the money in the budget or leave it in separate bills. So,
Do members have any questions on that
I don't
section?
even have Friday on here.
Oh, it's in your email. If you, Kate,
Yeah.
just the link to the bill as passed, it was passed last night, so
Okay.
it's pretty hot off the press.
Section 28 just updates a criminal penalty amount. It has not been changed since it was adopted in 1987. And this brings the amount to a level that's consistent with the civil penalties that the Human Rights Commission can seek for a violation of the Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act. For what it's worth here, this criminal penalty is currently not used because you need a state's attorney to bring the case. And typically the Human Rights Commission goes through the civil route, but it's been on the books, and this is just keeping it consistent with the civil penalties if at some point in the future we go back to leaving a criminal prosecution option. So,
Okay, thanks.
yep. And the last section from me is section 29. And this would be a report from the Division of Fire Safety requesting that they identify and examine provisions from other jurisdictions' fire and life safety codes that would facilitate the increased construction of new residential units or conversion of existing space in non-residential buildings to residential units, and could be incorporated into the Vermont Fire and Building Safety Code. And the report would include recommendations for legislative action. Just to give you a little background here, what we typically do in Vermont is we take an existing national code. The national codes are updated every 3 years. Vermont updates more slowly, but they'll take a national code. And then when they adopt it as a rule, the rule itself is just a list of changes to the national code that they make for Vermont. Other states make different changes. And this is asking them to look at other states to see, hey, is there a more cost-effective way of preserving life safety that might make it easier to build for 8-family dwellings or something like that, if you're trying to cluster dwellings downtown. Okay, any questions? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Not sure where David is, so.
Oh, he was waiting till we were finished.
Okay,
Okay.
great, perfect.
Oh, wait, maybe we have a question from Representative
Yeah.
Stebbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you don't mind, just finding out if how they look at that time-wise, that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, I'll email Mr. DeRocher and ask him if he can give me an idea of how they do the current breakdown for ADUs. Great.
That was, you had a question.
Or inside one's house.
Or inside the house, yeah.
Reach out.
Yeah, I'll look at it with you. You could try to check it with us.
I thought it was more just learning. What was your question?
Well, I had proposed something different. Page 68. It's a little more extensive for study.
Over in this section. I bet your previous question was what I was asking. You had a question on. Yes, yeah.
You talking about the fire safety study, Representative? I've forgotten what we drafted for that. It's been a few months.
But that's where I saw more extensive language.
Yes.
Because I was like, wow, this
Yes.
is much later
Yes.
than what I remember
Yeah,
seeing.
I had more extensive.
So it was in your bill.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, which we did. Okay, we looked at.
Do
Okay,
you want me to touch base on that language?
it's probably not, no. Well, I don't know.
So we're not gonna.
If we're-
with it now.
we're good.
Yeah.
That section.
So it's, there were a couple of things there, such as there was and I'm sure the Division of Fire Safety would do this anyway, but the House language in H68 explicitly called out maintaining adequate life safety protections in those changes. And then there were additional provisions there, such as looking for innovative approaches, innovative building techniques, et cetera, that might be things that Vermont could be an early adopter of.
And did our housing committee look at that language?
They did not. So
They didn't change it as it came over from the Senate.
they didn't. They left it as it is. So, but that the language is probably 3 times more lengthy in H68.
Right.
So if that's something you also want to discuss with House General offline, if they're going to put in any additional recommendations on the floor, that could be something that could be included there.
Go ahead.
Since we're waiting, anyway, I take the time otherwise, but it was the language that specifically asked Fire Safety to look at elevator types and whether under certain circumstances, one staircase would be sufficient. And also how to, I'll use the word reconcile, but reconcile the commercial and the residential codes in order to make it more possible to convert probably second floor commercial space to apartments.
Mhm.
And this recognizes 3 things that if there were different ways to do it, could save a lot of money.
Which I think we heard testimony on yesterday. So we may. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Well, I think that David Hall will join us soon, but in the meantime, we'll just take a break.
Okay.